So time then for the press preview, a first look at what is on tomorrow's front pages. And tonight we'll see what's making the headlines with columnist at The Article, Ali Miraj, and political and diplomatic correspondent for the Financial Times, Jasmine Cameron-Chileshe. Speaking to them in a moment. First of all, let's check out those headlines for you. We'll begin with The Observer, a warning from world leaders that Afghanistan is on the precipice of an absolute catastrophe and needs an urgent humanitarian effort to be agreed. While on the front of the Sunday Telegraph, Tony Blair brands President Biden's withdrawal from Afghanistan as imbecilic. That's also the headline on the front of the Sunday Times. Mr. Blair accusing President Biden of pulling out with little or no consultation with Britain. And the Sunday Mirror also goes with Tony Blair's assessment of President Biden's decision to withdraw US forces. On to the Sunday Express, reporting that the Minister for the Armed Forces says veterans should be proud of what they've accomplished despite the chaos in Kabul. While the Sunday People says that a record number of Britons have offered Afghan refugees rooms in their homes. And I'm joined now by Ali Miraj and Jasmine Cameron-Chileshe. Great to see you this Saturday evening. Thanks for being with us. Ali, why don't we start with you in the front of the Sunday Telegraph, a story actually that's covered in all the papers. Tony Blair has broken his silence. The Prime Minister, of course, who sent troops into Afghanistan 20 years ago. Ali.
Oh, sorry, Jonathan. Well, look, I was wondering when Tony Blair would pop up. Look, this is Tony Blair, who was in lockstep with George W. Bush, not only on the Afghanistan invasion, but also the Iraq invasion, which will always be his debacle, that will always remain his epitaph. What is clear is that the neoconservative doctrine of regime change, which was advocated by Paul Wolfowitz, George W. Bush, Dick Cheney, etc., has absolutely and utterly failed. Now, Tony Blair is saying that the decision to pull out was imbecilic. I disagree with him completely. I think Biden was absolutely right to pull out the troops. In fact, I would argue that the troops should have been pulled out 10 years ago when Osama bin Laden was killed in Pakistan back in 2011. However, what is lamentable is the manner in which the US has withdrawn its troops and the shambolic nature of the scenes that we're now witnessing at the airport in Kabul. Why the US did not airlift these people out from Bagram Air Base months ago is beggars belief. So I think the other thing that Blair is saying is the West in some sort of retreat, epoch-changing retreat, he says. Well, I do think that what we can see from this is that the hegemony of the US is now in decline. It peaked from the decline of the collapse of the Berlin Wall until the financial crisis in 07-08, and now it's in steady decline. And what this is going to show is, and Dominic Raab himself, the Foreign Secretary, has said this, is that we are now going to be reliant on Russia and China, India and Pakistan as regional players in that area to try and protect our interests. So China's got its own interests. It's got copper mines. It wants to use it as part of the Pakistan-China economic corridor to put its assets down to Gwadar port in southern Pakistan. Russia's got its own interests, as it always has had in the Central Asian region, and particularly Afghanistan. So it's a really shambolic situation, but I disagree with Blair on the fact that Biden shouldn't have pulled out the troops. He should have, but the manner is shambolic.
Jasmine, it's the same story on the front of the Sunday Times. Blair attacks Biden's retreat. Picture there of some of the troops absolutely exhausted. Stuart Ramsey, our chief correspondent today, is being reported in many of the papers, actually, his eyewitness account of people he believes being crushed right at the front of that queue. Desperate people trying to get on a flight out of Kabul. Do you think what Tony Blair has been saying is correct?
I mean, I think he is right in saying that actually we're at a turning point now where we no longer have a US that is focused on nation building, focused on spreading democracy. It's now becoming more, slightly more isolationist. And we saw this with Trump. But what's been quite striking is that Biden is almost, wanting to continue this. There isn't really any appetite among the American voters for more American troops on the ground, for more wars. They are, protecting their own interests. And I think, that puts the UK in quite an awkward position in terms of what that means for global Britain. So, we've been told that, the UK could still exert its influence outside the EU. We'd still be a key global player. And then as it's played out in the past few days, has sort of really shaken that. And the fact that Raab's conceding that, we may have to work with China, we may have to work with Russia in order to, stabilize the region, in order to actually make a difference, I think is actually quite a striking admission.
Yeah, I mean, Ali, where do you stand on where things go from here? Is it a situation where we just have to accept that we have to form some sort of relationships, engage in some form with whatever government turns up in Afghanistan, and also we have to have very good intelligence in terms of terror training and that sort of thing in the region? Is that the best we can hope for now?
Well, look, Jonathan, I think the Taliban has clearly hired a very expensive PR agency or undertaken a lot of media training in the last 20 years. They're giving this sort of cuddly, approachable impression of protecting women's rights, allowing safe passage for people outside the country, and saying that they won't have any reprisals. But the reality is that there's potentially going to be another civil war. We hope that doesn't happen, but we've got the brother of the former leader of the Northern Alliance, Ahmad Shah Massoud, sitting in the Panjshir Valley saying to the Taliban that it must engage in peace talks. So there is a potential for conflict, and there's also a potential, Jonathan, for this, again, Afghanistan to be the center of a new great game. It's always been of interest to outside powers trying to exert influence. Russia has interests there. China already has economic interests there, and so do India and Pakistan. And Pakistan in particular has always been involved for many, many years. I mean, it was Pakistan that was covertly supporting the Mujahideen against the Soviets from 79 to 89, whilst the Soviets were there and also left with their tail between their legs. Pakistan has always been involved and so supported the Taliban as well for many years and has got its own interests. I remember President Musharraf telling me once after 2001 when he came to London that he was going to extract as much bounty as he could from the US before they ditch us again. Those were his very words, a reference to the fact that the US pulled out rapidly when the Soviets left in 1989. So you can't really rely on the US. And I think what this shows is that potential allies of the US in other regions, I mean, you've got to look at China in Taiwan, Russia now emboldened to potentially get up to mischief in Ukraine. What would happen in those situations? What action would the US and its allies take? And I think tonight it's very, very odd this week that Biden, who's the big diplomat, over 4 decades of experience in US foreign policy and foreign relations, as first as a senator and then as vice president, has got himself into a situation where he really has cold-shouldered his allies in this, not even a word of thanks, and giving a bizarre press conference earlier this week on booster jabs for COVID of all times. So I think Biden has got a lot of repair work to do in the coming days and weeks.
Yeah. OK, well, let's move things back to the UK, Jasmine, and talk about Dominic Raab. More revelations in the papers. The Sunday Times, Tim Shipman, the political editor of the Sunday Times, has got what seems to be a good scoop, saying that Dominic Raab was told to come home from his holiday in Crete by Downing Street, but he stayed put for 2 days because the Prime Minister said that was OK.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a particularly rough couple of days for Raab in terms of the stories that have come out. And certainly, it's important for everyone to have a holiday, certainly everyone to unwind. But, the problem is that actually this whole situation really reflects poorly on his judgment and Johnson's. There was clearly a crisis unfolding in Afghanistan. And he should have returned to the UK sooner. And his argument and his defence has been, I've been able to work from, I was doing it remotely, I was still attending COBRA meetings, I was still accessible. But actually, it's the optics of this situation that are quite bad. At a time of crisis, we want to know that our senior officials and senior ministers are engaged, they're taking an active role and leading these sorts of situations, as opposed to, potentially being on the beach. But I do think in some ways Raab has also become a scapegoat for many of those who, especially among the Tory party, who are really angry at the UK's role in Afghanistan at the moment, are really frustrated with how things have panned out. I think there is a genuine sense of both with the US and UK of being almost asleep at the wheel, a sense of how was this taken everyone by surprise? Why was the intelligence not good enough? And so I do in some ways think that Raab is getting a lot of stick for this in a way that it wouldn't have made that much of a difference had he been in the UK in regards to how the events of the weekend ultimately unfolded.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Whether he was in London or in Crete, it probably wouldn't have necessarily changed the course of events, Ali. And his job is pretty safe now that we know the Prime Minister said he could stay on holiday.
Well, indeed. But then the Prime Minister also said that he was full square behind Matt Hancock 24 hours before he had to go. Look, I think Raab will probably stay, but it's a very bad week for Dominic Raab. And what I would suggest is that the Foreign Office discovers the Microsoft Outlook calendar function, because you have a situation here where not only the Foreign Secretary is away on leave, also the Permanent Secretary at the Foreign Office and the Home Office as well, and the Defence Department as well as Lord Ahmed of Wimbledon, who's a thoroughly decent guy, don't get me wrong, but again, also responsible for Afghanistan and away at the same time. So beggars belief that they couldn't coordinate their diaries to ensure that someone was on duty when this crisis was actually unfolding. So I totally agree with Jasmine that the optics of this for Dominic Raab look absolutely appalling. I do feel that he has been made a bit of a scapegoat, but quite honestly, in a situation like this where we're dealing with an utter debacle, people being crushed at the airport, you've got to be seen to be on top of your brief. And he's also come in for a lot of criticism for the fact that Foreign Office staff haven't been the ones processing visa applications. It's almost been left to officials from the MOD to do that, where it really should have been the Foreign Office stepping up to manage that. So I think bad week for Raab.
OK, and we'll just finish this part with the front page of the Sunday Express, Jasmine, because they're looking at, I suppose, whatever positivity you can in this horrific situation. Never stop being proud. And we have to say, don't we, that those members of the armed forces on the ground in Kabul, and we've seen it with our own eyes, our correspondent there in the heart of it, they are doing the most incredible job. And Stuart Ramsey saying that they're saying to him, despite tours of Afghanistan, previous tours, this is the worst situation they have ever seen.
Yeah, and I can imagine that if you are a veteran or if you're, have been involved in the military, the past few days might have been quite triggering and quite emotional. And we saw this, for example, with Tom Tugendhat, who's the MP, who's a Tory MP who also serves in the army. And he stood up in the House of Commons on Wednesday and he said, look, this has been an incredibly emotional time for me as someone that's a former soldier, hearing, watching the events unfolding and, I do think it is important to reiterate that actually, the work of the army and the soldiers on the ground is invaluable, and they definitely should be praised and recognised for their service at this particularly difficult time in the region.
OK, don't go away. Ali, Jasmine, thank you very much for the moment. Coming up after the break, the Telegraph writes that Boris Johnson's plan for nightclubs to ask for vaccine passports is in chaos. Hello again, you're watching the press preview. Ali and Jasmine still with us. Jasmine, let's look at the front of the Observer and back to Afghanistan. And it's all very well getting people out, isn't it? But of course, we also urgently need to get aid in, and that's something the Observer is highlighting.
Yes, the Observer highlights warnings from the UN, essentially saying that the country could face an absolute human catastrophe. It warns of hunger, homelessness. It basically references the fact that the country needs more supplies, whether that's medical supplies, shelter supplies, and that sort of thing. And while I think the focus at the moment is, the evacuations, what's happening at the airport, there are also longer term questions about what Taliban rule in Afghanistan will actually look like, whether or not cities and provinces will have the economic resources to function. And I think especially as we see, the US and the UK withdraw militarily, I think it will be crucial that international organisations, whether that's charities or the UN, really do step in and ensure that we do avoid a humanitarian crisis in the region, because all countries, whether that's the UK or the US, do have an obligation to ensure that, even though they've left militarily, that actually human rights are maintained and that we do avoid a widespread crisis in the region.
Yeah, just give me one sentence on this, Ali, and then I'm going to ask you about nightclub vaccine passports.
Well, I think Jasmine's absolutely right. I mean, there is a humanitarian crisis absolutely unfolding. It's a very, very serious situation. Thousands of people have been displaced. You can see the chaos at the airport, but the chaos is much further afield as well. People trying to get to the airport, there's no way for them to actually get there. So it is this very serious situation. And the head of the UN there is saying that we need to get this humanitarian aid in now, before the snow starts arriving and winter sets in, when it will be impossible.
And Ali, just staying with you then, let's turn to the Telegraph and talk about this vaccine passport policy. They're saying it's in chaos. This is about getting nightclubs to only let people in if they've been vaccinated and can prove it.
Well, this is the Prime Minister had announced in recent weeks that as at the end of September, all nightclubs will require vaccine certification to allow people in. This is a leaked letter from a lawyer apparently at the Department of Health saying that that is not the case. I have to declare an interest here, Jonathan, in that I am a part-time house music DJ, and I played my first gig last Friday in Shoreditch. And the place, the vibe was good, but the place was not rammed. Now, that could be because it's August, a lot of people are on holiday, or it could be because confidence has not quite returned from some punters to be in a congested environment with lots of sweaty people dancing. I don't know, but from my perspective as a performer, it is something that I support. I do want people back safely in a clubbing environment. And therefore, I think, look, no one likes the ID cards or COVID vaccination passports, but I think it's just a necessary evil to get things back on track.
Yeah, it's a gig I would love to see, Ali, one day soon, hopefully. Jasmine, a thought from you on this?
I mean, I do think, it was a policy that got a lot of pushback from Tory MPs. And I think the government is really going to potentially run into some issues when it comes to, getting this through Parliament, and also the logistics of, working with organisations and companies to make sure that this policy can actually be implemented on the ground. And I think when it was first announced, there was that bit of scepticism about whether it would actually go ahead or whether it was just deployed to get notably young people to take the vaccine. So I do think in terms of I understand the logic behind it. You want to get people into these venues in a safe way, but I do think the logistics and the practicalities are going to prove to be a stumbling block for the government.
Yeah, OK. Thank you both very much indeed. We'll speak to you again in half an hour or so. Ali, Jasmine, thank you.